Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with award-winning actor, author, and filmmaker Candace Campbell, or Dr. Candy. She has a lot of good news for leaders tearing out their hair because of employee disengagement, or worse, poor employee retention. Her doctoral work, completed with interprofessional groups at Stanford, and subsequent books deal with mitigating this very issue of the cultural miscommunication issues that are the root of the problem. Candy uses her 20-plus years of experience as an actor, director, coach, facilitator, and her 40 years in the healthcare industry to help leaders create a culture where everybody wants to work and nobody wants to leave. We cover quite a bit in this interview. Enjoy.
I'm improv, so whatever. Let's go.
Let's do it. All right, so Dr. Campbell, thank you very much for taking a minute out. I'm looking forward to delving into your work. And prior to doing that, we've gone through quite a time with COVID over the last couple of years plus. How did you survive that time period, and how has it changed the way that not only you live your life, but the way that you conduct business?
Thank you for that question, Joe. I'll tell you, I did a couple of things because to just give you a quick prequel to where I was before COVID, I had retired from my full-time faculty position as an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco, teaching nursing in the graduate program. And the reason I retired early is twofold. First of all, my oldest child, who is producing children, the others are parenting cats, had moved to the East Coast, and I wanted to be close to family. And so I moved across country, but also because in my own side gig business as a speaker and performer, I had 12 contracts in 3 countries pending. Well, most were signed, but anyway. And so there I was. I moved just a few months before COVID, and then, boom, the world changed. So I did 2 things. First of all, I moved in with my daughter to help tutor my grandson and set up a production studio in her basement until I could get my own place outside of COVID. And that's when I started doing what everybody else was doing, speaking and performing via the internet. So that was the first, and it's not so unusual. The second thing, though, that I did when I realized that these association conventions, most of which I was, booked to speak at, were closed or just a few went virtual. My very good friend, Sharon Weinstein, and I are very good friends, and she also lives in this area. We are both nurse leaders, and we started complaining to each other. What are we going to do? How long is this going to last? Just like everybody else. And we said to each other, you know what? It's been a couple of weeks that we've been moaning and complaining. What we need to do is what Florence Nightingale would do. We need to do something. We need to take some action. And so we created an LLC, and we did it at the time. It's called Lead for Excellence. And we did it knowing that it would be an interim sort of idea because we didn't expect the pandemic to last as long as it did. But we thought, okay, what do healthcare thought leaders need right now? And what we believe they need and need is thought leaders who can help solve the problems that have been in the background for decades, and now we're front and center. And that really has a lot to do with leadership training and succession planning. And so we continued to offer free virtual seminars and a global healthcare leadership summit with 28 to 30 different thought leaders on an annual basis for a couple of years with sponsors, so it could be free. It was a lot of work, and then when things cleared up, we said, you know what, we're both getting busy. Let's move on. And so we we disbanded that. We're still great friends, and now both of us are really busy doing our other things now that things are opening up. So that's what I did.
So you've had quite a run in life with the things that you've done creatively, and I'm curious to kind of boil down exactly who you are. I want to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, third graders at a career day, and one of the kids looks up at you and says, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
I say I'm an award-winning actor, author, and filmmaker, and nurse.
So let's kind of get to the essence of you a little bit and kind of find out how all this happened. Let's go back to your childhood. Kind of talk to me about where you were born and raised and how these seeds got you, how these motivations, I mean, to be a creative, to be a writer and an actor, I mean, that really requires a different level of life. So how did all this begin for you?
I would say that, well, first of all right, I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And as the last kind of oops child in the family, my brothers were quite a bit older than me, quite a bit. And the only girl, I was shy. And one day, a teenager, when I was 5 years old in the summer before kindergarten, a teenager came to our door. She lived a couple of blocks away. And she was asking the moms if they would like to send their preschoolers, their preschool girls, to an etiquette class. And that, as I look back on it, really planted some of the seeds for what I do now. Now, one of them is that in that class, we were taught, aside from how to drink tea and act appropriately in a restaurant, which my mother appreciated, I'm sure. She was an actor. She became a dancer and had her own, company for years and years before she passed away. But she taught us to bring our dolls, and that our dolls were going to speak in front of the little group. And I think there was like 6 of us. And she had those little chairs, and she put them, she formatted them like a theater, and we took turns being in the audience and being, if you will, on stage, which was, her garage. And we told the stories. We had our dolls tell the stories, and she schooled us in that way, 3 days a week for several weeks during the summer. She taught us how to bow, how to sing in front of people, how to be polite and applaud when it was. She taught us what a standing ovation was. and so, although I was quite shy, like I said, I think that brought me out of my shell a little bit. And then here's one other thing that plays into it, now that I think of it. Because I was the last child and my parents worked a lot, I was asked to sort of sit and be quiet a lot, and I always had little dolls to play with. I had a great imagination and curiosity. And I think that because, in the day we didn't have any devices, this was the day when kids were let to go out and play and climb trees and not be home till lunch or dinner. We devised all sorts of games because there wasn't anything else to do. And so that curiosity about life and the imagination had many seeds growing up. We did a paper, we, sold ads and lemonade and all sorts of things that we did just as a neighborhood kid. So that was the beginning.
So you definitely, with your doctoral work and with the body of work that you have, you definitely have a right-left brain kind of thing going on. How does that work for you? How do each of them operate, in a harmony to allow you to do both?
That's a good reflective question that I have spent some time on, because as my initial degree was in speech communications theater and emphasis in acting, with a minor in education, I've always enjoyed teaching. And when I was in high school, you know how you go to the counselor when you're a sophomore or junior and you've taken the tests and they sit you down and say, well, let's see the path that maybe you should take, you know, that sort of talk. And now I'm a baby boomer, so at the time, the glass ceiling was just being broken. And mostly it was secretary, teacher, or nurse were my options. So when she asked what I thought I'd want to do, I knew I didn't want to be a secretary. I liked being a teacher, but I really thought I want to travel. And so nursing sounded more adventurous to me. And also because I want to be tender when I say this. I come from a home of functional alcoholics, but sometimes I was allowed to stay home to take care of my mother when she had one of those, quote, sick headaches. I really enjoyed taking care of people, and I thought, well, I told the counselor, I'd like to be a nurse, I think. And she said, oh, okay, great. Let's look at your tests. Well, I was getting C's and B's in math and science, but I was off the charts in reading and comprehension. She said, I think you do better as a teacher. So, years later, after I got the first bachelor's and was headed off, I thought, to New York to be a repertory actor, something happened that sort of changed the trajectory. And that was, I had one of those, we used to call them a casting couch experience, where the director put the moves on me when nobody was there, and I shoved him across the room and said, what are you doing? Because I knew him. He'd been a professor of mine. And he said, you're going to New York, don't you know this is the way the game is played? And I said, not for me. And I walked out, and I didn't do theater again for 10 years. But I had to find something to do. My parents were very upset. I didn't know what to do. And happily, talking about the right brain, I have some other gifts in my tool belt. I can speak French and German because I had a grandma of each. And so, and I had spent some time in Europe as a junior in college. I lived in Vienna. So when Pan American came to town looking for some stewardesses, some flight attendants, I actually got hired, even though, Joe, I'm only 5'2". I'm not exactly Barbie doll, you know. So anyway, there I was, traveling all over the world, not knowing what I wanted to do, still thinking in the back of my head, someday I'll get to be a repertory actor. But a funny thing happened, and that was people get sick on airplanes. I don't know if it's ever happened when you're on the flight, Joe, but it does. Yeah. And so I was always the person to go run to help. And here's another little factoid. I don't know if you knew, but airlines, they actually carry oxygen. At least they did then. I'm pretty sure they still do. They didn't have, in my day, they didn't have blood pressure cuffs or anything like that. But we had that, and we had the equipment, or enough equipment for little things. So I was always the one to run to help. And I found, by so doing, that there were a lot of ex-nurses who were flight attendants. And one day, I say I got the call to be a nurse when I helped somebody who was, you know, having a problem, and all the other nurses who were flight attendants said, you know, oh, are you also a nurse? And I said, no, but I'm kind of thinking of going to nursing school because I wanted to do something that made a difference, and I wanted to be able to settle down. You know, being a flight attendant is, you're always gone. So I I did. I decided to go to nursing school, and that is where the left brain comes in, Joe, because I really had a hard time. Microbiology, anatomy and physiology, chemistry, all of these sorts of left brain courses were really hard for me. I had to study twice as hard, I think, as a lot of other people. But what happened is that because I had to study so hard, I sort of went back to, I don't know if you ever do this, Joe. Sometimes if you think to yourself, this is a complex concept. If I were 8 or 10, how would I explain it to that person? I sort of had those conversations with myself. And in the end, turns out I blended the art and the science not only on stage, but also as an educator wherever I wound up. So that's how you do it.
So I'm curious, who's been a role model or a hero for you in your life?
Living or dead?
Both or either?
There was, aside from Florence Nightingale, who, of course, I characterized on stage, but I never met, obviously. Aside from her, there was a woman who was the choir director in our little church who, in her day, had a master's in voice, and that was pretty unusual. You know, I came up in the 50s and the 60s, and she was an amazing woman. Not only was she really good as a choir director because she touched on theological points in a way that little kids could understand them, but she taught us music, and she also was an artist. And she was probably the first inspiration for me when her house was full of her paintings, not like other people's houses that might have a copy of a famous painting or, I don't know, something, pictures on the wall. She had paintings, her own paintings, all over her walls. And I just thought that was so cool. I wanted to do that, and she encouraged me. She encouraged me in all sorts of ways. She and her daughter, who was my best friend, who's recently passed away, and my first college roommate, were doing all sorts of dramatic skits through high school and all sorts of funny things that we did. But she also encouraged me when I would look at her paintings. She'd say, you know, anybody can learn this. All you have to do is set your mind to it. So years later, after I did, like I said, I became a flight attendant for 5 years, I needed a creative outlet. So I started painting, and my house now is full of my paintings. And I happily have won awards for portraiture, too. So I think, Joe, the answer to your question is that along the way, we're inspired by certain people, even when we don't realize that we're being inspired.
You know, it's interesting. Yeah, I can relate. I'm actually a visual artist, and it makes it really easy for my wife to, decorate the house because it's kind of the same thing around our house. I got paintings all over the place. But, yeah, that connected a lot of dots with that answer there, because there are people that do give you divine inspiration in your life that maybe they don't even realize, and it's just by osmosis because they are who they are. So I'm going to up the ante just a little bit on this last question and ask you this. If you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend some time with them, who would it be?
Oh, I know. It would be Julia Cameron. I've been a fan of Julia Cameron. Do you know The Artist's Way?
I'm not familiar, no.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
She
lives both in Taos, New Mexico, I believe, and in New York City. during a time that was really difficult for me, I wasn't yet back on stage. After I was a flight attendant, I got married and had 3 children. And then when that happened and ended in divorce, I moved from the LA area up to the San Francisco area to be close to family. I decided I wanted to laugh again, and I wanted to get on stage again. But with 3 kids, 8, 11, and 13, rehearsals and everything, it was really tough. So I couldn't figure out how to do that. And then there was a little ad in the paper about a stand-up comedy class at the local community. So I started doing stand-up comedy, and within a few months, 3 of my friends from that class and I decided to break off and create our own improv company there in the San Francisco area. And during that time, it was on the personal level, it was tough, and it was not an easy separation and divorce. A lot of complications in that. And I was talking to one of my fellow stand-up comedian friends, an older woman who, again, was another inspiration. And she said to me, "Have you heard of Julia Cameron and her book, The Artist's Way?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, it's kind of like the Bible for artists. It's, I really recommend it." Well, I tell you, Joe, you're going to love this book. I should be getting a kickback for all the people I tell about her work. She definitely inspired me, and I've gone through her workbook so many times I had to buy 2 more copies because I've put notes and journals in the book. One of the things that she does is starts with teaching affirmations and about how projecting into the future, visualizing that, dreaming big is something that it's the soul of the artist. Not making something out of nothing. And of course, I was doing that. I was learning to do that at improv. So I thought, well, that's good. But I didn't know a lot of things, and I just started dreaming on paper. I'll say it. And the other thing that she does is that she postulates that there's no such thing as writer's block. And that's a pretty big statement. If you've ever been a writer. Oops, hold on. There's something? Okay. I'll say that again. She postulates that there is no such thing as writer's block. If you've ever had writer's block, she says that when you feel frozen, you are focusing inward. But the creative act is an outward expression. It's harnessing some of the art that is inherent in the universe. And she says, if you could picture it, ideas are like apples on a tree, or they're like raindrops that come down. There's so many, you can't count them. And all you need to do is open yourself up to the universe, and you'll have it. And so anyway, I'd love to talk to her. She's another role model.
Yeah, I love that visual. Yeah, that makes sense too. Yeah. So, every day, you've done this for a long time, being a creative requires a different DNA, a different moxie. What has it been about your life that gets you up in the morning, that gets you to want to perform, that makes you want to help people? What is that about you? What drives you through a day?
I suppose because even before I was a nurse, but certainly after I became a nurse, it became very clear to me that all of us are only one breath away from eternity. And my goal is to live my life to the fullest and to use my gifts for good purpose, to make a difference. Every day I have to ask myself that question of what is the next best thing that I should do today? Like Olaf says in Frozen, right? Do the next right thing. I love that line. So That's it. After you've seen, and I was a younger person, I was in my 20s when I first was bedside and observed somebody dying. It changed me.
So let's go back to that time period in your life in your 20s. If you have a dream tonight, you run into that version of you, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on the life you've lived, the roads you've gone down, the wisdom you've gained, the challenges you've overcome. What advice would you give your younger self?
One of the things that I would say is don't let the turkeys get you down. Do not let the naysayers tell you that when you have an idea that you think it's a pretty good idea, that it won't ever happen, that it's ridiculous, that you're not qualified, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first thing. And the second thing I think I would say is don't blame God for when people act mean or they say mean things or they do negative things. It's not God and the universe that's causing this. Everybody has the capacity for good and evil, and we make choices all the time. And when people make choices that are not good, don't say, it's God's fault. I don't know why people do that.
Yeah, I get that. I understand. So at the end of the proverbial day, how do you quantify a good day? How do you look back and say that day worked for me?
I do. Before I lay my head down on the pillow, I often journal about what happened, what successes there were, what the wins were of the day. But more so, I think that if there's an unresolved issue, if there's a problem that's still going on, I really, before I close my eyes, I say a little prayer and see if, I can think of something that I can wake up with new inspiration, revelation about how to solve that problem. And I will tell you, that reflection time has led to me doing all of the things that you mentioned that I have done. I will say I call Florence Nightingale the reluctant celebrity. She really had it foisted upon her. She didn't ask for it. I feel that I also was the reluctant filmmaker. I certainly never thought that I would have 3 solo shows. I didn't happen on them by accident. It was sort of, I couldn't help but do it because of what was going on. And, as a filmmaker, same thing. I never wanted to go to film school. But I had to do it to solve the problem.
In this life that you've led with these creative accolades and just all over the place, I'm curious, what is the thing that you've done that you're the proudest of?
Well, thank you. That, for me, that's rather like saying, which of your children do you prefer?
Right.
Because each of these things, I am blessed to look all over my home and see and know that a lot of people have my paintings hanging in their home, and I have plenty of them. I haven't been so active as a painter lately because I've been so busy as an actor and a writer. But again, the books that I've written, the first one that I wrote, which is a children's book, My Mom is a Nurse, again, I never planned to write it. It's just that I wanted to give it and I couldn't find it. And that that sells every month still. And I think I wrote it in 2005. And the next one, which is Good Things Come in Small Packages, I Was a Preemie. Again, that was a book that had to be written because it wasn't there. And then the film, Micro Premature Babies, How Low Can You Go? That's when I had to go to film school because I tried to pitch it to other producers that I knew because I was a commercial actor then as well as now on the side. And they all said the same thing. Gosh, if you have a particular idea for this film, you should do it or it's going to be changed. And then when I had some physical issues, I've had 5 foot surgeries and couldn't do bedside clinical nursing and teaching in that way, I started going, I did my master's and then my doctorate. And when you have to choose on what you're going to do with your doctorate, they say, well, we can plug you into some research project we've got going, or you can carve your own path. It's going to be harder, but what do you want? Well, again, I didn't want to necessarily take a doctorate, but in order to teach there, I had to. So I said, well, the only brick wall I've come across, because I've been teaching improv in Silicon Valley now for years, is that nobody in healthcare will let me teach it, even though people are dying because teams are not talking well, they're not communicating well. So she said, well, then I guess you better do it. She got me hooked up at Stanford. We did that research. And then later on, when I found that research was sort of getting dusty on a shelf, somebody said, you should write a book. Well, okay, so now number 2 is coming out on that Improv to Improve series. So I can't say that anyone is my favorite, Joe. I just kind of feel like these are things that happen because I'm open to the universe. I'm open to whatever is supposed to happen. And maybe that's too wishy-washy, but I don't know how else to describe it. I'm happy and pleased with all the outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to describe it. So maybe this will nail down a couple of things a little bit more concretely. Everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, those that have your paintings, those that have experienced your work in one way or another. But ultimately, you lived your life. You're the driving force. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Curious. I'm curious. That's who I am. I'm a curious person.
That is probably the shortest answer I've ever gotten for that question. That actually makes the most sense. So let's kind of go out on a couple triumphant notes here. Tell me, what has been one of the best fan letters, feedback that you've ever gotten from the work you've done?
Aw. Well, thank you. I'm going to tie that to what's coming up. One of the nicest testimonials I ever got was from a nurse who had seen my performance as Florence Nightingale, and she said it really verified or validated validated the perception that I had, but I didn't understand because I hadn't, the show is based on her 200 books and articles and over 10,000 letters of Nightingales that I've read and categorized. So she said, I didn't know so much about her life, about all the barriers that she broke through. And she said, I felt like you were her. Of course, she didn't know, but she didn't know. Nobody knows what she was really like. But she said, I felt like you were her, and I think you should have this show on Broadway because it's more than, it's more important than just for nurses. And so, Joe, I may have shared with you, in March, the show is going, well, not to Broadway, a few blocks off Broadway, but we're there for 2 weeks in residency from March 7th through 19th at Theater Row in Manhattan.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Well, and that's kind of a lead in to where I want to go with you. If anyone wants to find out about the show, paintings, writing, anything involving your life, where's the best place on the web for them to go?
They can email me at candy@candycampbell.com, or there are 2 websites. The Florence Nightingale one is Florence Nightingale Live, LIVE.com. There are videos and testimonials there. Or if they're interested in improv training, facilitating leadership retreats and so forth, that's pretty simple. That website is my name, candycampbell.com. Lots of videos and testimonials on there too.
Wonderful. Dr. Candy, thank you for opening up. Thanks for taking time out and letting us all into your world. Good luck with everything. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe, and you as well. Delightful to speak with you.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.